In this video, I'm going to talk about valid user-defined symbols and best practices involving those things. Essentially, as we're going to see, these are variables for us. For the most part, the only user-defined symbol are variables and I guess class names. So variable names, class names, and method names, we'll get to methods much later. You might have heard of methods. Other words for methods include procedures or functions. Don't focus on that right now. Right now, our focus is mostly variable names, but also class names. They belong to a category known as user-defined symbols. These are a combination of characters, digits, and symbols, other symbols, that users create. There are some limitations, however. So these are the characters, digits, and symbols that can be used in user-defined symbols. We see capital A through Z, lowercase a through Z. These are different characters, right? Capital A is distinctly different from A. To us, right, it's just, well, these are the same letter. One's capital, one's lowercase. But in terms of the computer, they're completely different characters. So we're saying capital A through Z, lowercase a through Z are in this set of user-defined symbols, valid user-defined symbol. And then we have our digits, 0 through 9. This little guy, known as an underscore, $sign. Those are the special characters that we can use in variable names. Note, while user-defined symbols may consist of digits, the digit cannot appear at the beginning of the user-defined symbol. What am I saying? Here I am declaring a variable, an integer called test3. It consists of lowercase alphabetic characters and a digit, which is fine, right? These are fine. What you can't do is begin with a digit. Additionally, Java has set aside certain keywords that have a special meaning and action within the Java programming language. These are known as reserved words. I also just simply keywords would accept that. But reserved words, as the name suggests, are reserved. They have been reserved. You can't use them as your user-defined symbol. And I know that you are already, your brain's already going at it. You're already thinking some reserved words. Here is the complete list of reserved words, and we're going to see some classics such as int, double is over here. There's 50 in total, right? Some of these have actually been like phased out. Some of them we won't use at all. Actually, most of them we won't use at all in this course. But these words, if you try to use them as a variable name, too bad. They're already taken. These are used. They have specific meaning. On a slightly related question that I often get while I'm here, some people ask me, are there programming languages in other languages other than English? The answer to that, the short answer is yes, right? I mean, there's like programming languages that are written in Spanish. There's some that are written in Chinese. But the fact of the matter is all of the popular ones throughout the world are in English. And so that's what the focus tends to be. Your Java, your C++, Python, JavaScript, those are the most popular languages that we code in, and they use English. And I put that in quotes because this is it, right? These are the only reserved words. So this is technically all the English that you would need to know in order to program. So it's really not as much English as it tends to lend itself to. Okay? So those words are reserved. We can't use those as user-defined symbols. I'm gonna, oh, good. We're back to full screen. So are the following user-defined symbols valid or invalid? Right? I kind of want you maybe to pause and write down your solutions to these, but we're gonna take a look. Greeting 1, perfectly valid. G, valid, not great. Right? This isn't a very descriptive user-defined symbol, but not great. 101 Dalmatians, this one's invalid. The only reason being, we're actually starting with a digit. Hello World is invalid because of this comma and technically also this space. I want you to think of space as a character because it is. Greeting, right? These little less than, greater than signs, we call these things angle brackets. The angle brackets are not valid. And public looks pretty good, except it's a reserved word. You've seen it in your class header. So here's the solution to these bad boys. Okay, A note on underscore and dollar sign. While they are valid user-defined symbols, that doesn't mean we should use them in practice. Now, what I'm about to talk about kind of varies from programming language to programming language, and it could be a stylistic thing. We'll talk a little bit more about style in a future video, but it could be a stylistic thing depending on where you're like what you're coding for. Are you at Microsoft or Google? Or are you doing freelance stuff? Or are you doing open source coding? It's possible that the organization that you're coding through is giving you stylistic guidelines, saying things like, yeah, we like underscore in our user-defined symbols, or yeah, we like dollar signs in our user-defined symbols. But usually it varies from programming language to programming language. In the case of Java, we avoid these things usually, right? Underscore and dollar sign, while they are valid, they tend to not be best practice. We'll talk about best practice here. Since space is not a valid character, you may be tempted to use the underscore in its place, right? When declaring a user-defined symbol, a variable, birth year, I can't use space. It's not in the subset of valid user-defined characters or symbols or digits. I can use underscore, and so maybe you do this. Now, in some languages, I think Python kind of comes to mind. This is generally accepted. For whatever reason, people like using underscore in those languages, and so that would be accepted there. But in Java, not so much. Such a technique would not be considered best practices. Best practices refers to the techniques that have shown to be preferred or superior in industry. The main area where I hear this term thrown around, best practices, is actually the medical field, where effectively maybe there's different routes. You could do a surgery, different ways of going about that surgery, and there is generally like groups of people, committees, boards that get together and they kind of decide, while there's different ways that you could go about this surgery, this is the one that we like the most, this is the one that we recommend, this is the one we're going to say is best practices. Same thing here, right? Such a technique is not best practices. Instead, what we use in Java and most programming languages, I would say, is a technique for naming variables known as camel casing. If you have some type of data that consists of multiple words, right? If I'm talking about the birth year, what I'm going to do, instead of using an underscore, and I can't use space, I'm going to squish those things together, and we're going to create the variable birth year. And we're separating, right, new words. We're distinguishing new words with uppercase letters. Social Security number, in practice, what I would do is SSN, to be fair. But if I want to take these three words and camel case them, this is the variable name I would end up with. Again, new words are distinguished with an uppercase letter. Notice that we're still beginning this variable name with a lowercase letter. Additionally, best practice suggests that class names should begin with a capital letter while still employing camel casing. So our variable names should be lowercase. That's actually subtly important, while our class names are uppercase, right? These are user-defined symbols as well. Here I have a public class computer lab. I'm still employing camel casing. We're just beginning the user-defined symbol with an uppercase letter, right? If I create League of Legends here, again, I'm using it as a class name. We see public class League of Legends, and I am distinguishing new words using uppercase letters, but because it is a class, I'm beginning with an uppercase letter. Later on, we'll see that class names beginning with a capital letter is the reason why objects such as scanner and string begin with a capital letter. Right? When we make our scanner objects, when we make our string objects or variables, we're using capital S on that scanner. We're using capital S on string. Ultimately, there's a class within Java called scanner. There's a class in Java called string. And those class names are following best practices. Those class names are beginning with a capital letter, and that's why we ultimately have to use capital letters. It's actually a good thing because it helps us distinguish them, makes them different from just a typical variable name. Best practices makes it easy to tell the difference between a primitive data type and objects, as all objects will begin with a capital letter, thanks to best practices. Recall we have 8 primitive data types. Pause and try to name them if you can. We got int, double, boolean, char. Those are the 4 I'm asking you to know for this class, but in addition, there's byte, short, long, and float. Those are those 8 primitive data types. There are also reserved words. Now, every one of those primitive data types have lowercase letters, right? They begin with a lowercase character. But as we see in objects, we've seen some data types, scanner and string. They begin with capital letters. That's a good way to distinguish them from the primitive data types. Okay? It's not necessarily syntax. We'll talk about that in a future video, but it is convention. It is best practices. Okay, here's some example of primitive data types, and then over here we see some example of objects. This one is interesting. There is a double object in Java. There's also an integer object and a character object. But don't worry about those now. But I can tell the difference, right? The double primitive data type is a lowercase d, whereas the double object, capital D. Okay, let's recap this stuff. Variable names, class names, and method names all belong to a category known as user-defined symbols. Which of the following symbols is valid in user-defined symbols? In our case, in Java, this $ is valid. Plus sign, that guy's reserved, right? That is our addition operator. And then our period is actually how we'll call methods. We've seen it. It's sneaky, but we've seen it. This guy, I don't think is used in Java. The following user-defined symbol is valid. True or false? This is false. Okay, my next question would be why? This is invalid. This is not a valid user-defined symbol. This is false because we begin with a digit here. While digits are valid in user-defined symbols, they cannot appear at the beginning of the user-defined symbol. Techniques that have shown to be preferred or superior in industry are known as best practices. Java set aside certain keywords that have a special meaning and action within the Java programming language. These are known as reserved words. The naming convention that uses capital letters instead of spaces to distinguish words is known as camel casing. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. Short and sweet. See you in the next one.